آله وصحبه أجمعين ثم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي آمين يا رب العالمين ثم أما بعد. So, first of all, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to thank all of you for coming this morning, and I want to let everybody know a little bit about how we're going to conduct this program today. That's about a half-day program. Give you a little bit of the format and background of how this program is conducted. The intention behind this program is very clear from the overall name of the program, Quran for Family. The intention behind that was, a lot of times we have discussions in classes on tafsir, and the language in them is very tough. It's very technical. And it's not something that's very easily digestible to people that either don't have a background in that sort of thing, and especially not easy for children to consume. Like, 10 years and older I'm talking about. It's not easy for them to consume. And if it's not easy for them to consume and they're Muslims, it's definitely not even easy for non-Muslims to consume. So it's really important that we have discussions about the Quran in language that just anybody can understand. And that's sort of the intention behind this program. The other intention is also to encourage people like yourselves to try and attend with your family so you have something to discuss about Allah's book as a family from what you learn together. So those are the couple of intentions behind this program. Inshallah ta'ala, that means that some of you that are familiar to my work in terms of the podcasts and tafsir lectures and things like that, I tend to go into a lot of linguistics and grammar and nuanced stuff, and I'm going to try to avoid that kind of discussion here. Even though we're going to talk about some very heavy things, I'm trying not to be technical. I'm trying not to be using difficult language. The format is that this first session is the longest one. This is probably going to be 50 minutes or so. That's the longest session. And then you guys will have a 10-minute break for open questions and answers. We'll come back and I'll try to hold on to this like 35-minute sessions and 10-minute break. 35-minute sessions and 10-minute break. And we'll go like that throughout the day. Every 10-minute break is an open question-answer session. So the first 10-minute break I'll give to the sisters. Whatever questions you may have, I'll wait for you here. Next 10-minute brothers, next 10-minute sisters, and we'll go back and forth. That means that you respect the opposite gender and don't come up and say, brother, I have a question. While I'm answering the sister. The sister doesn't just, kind of drink the lines and then go, brother, a really important thing I want to ask you. I know it's important, but let's just respect each other's side and give each other courtesy. If in case nobody has a question on one side, I'll switch over to the other side and give them that opportunity, inshallah. Okay. The most difficult for me and the longest part of this program is actually the introduction. And probably the most important part of this program is also the introduction. A lot of times we don't properly get introduced to a surah. And there's a number of things involved in really getting introduced to a surah. And that helps set the tone for how you're going to understand what Allah is going to say in that surah. That's why I spend a lot of time in the introduction. Because once you have that, then the rest of the surah, it has a context and everything fits in a certain way. And it becomes easy for us to understand and also to remember. Okay? The first thing I'm going to talk to you guys about is, what surah number is this? Anybody know? 55. What's the surah before it? 54. That's Surah Al-Qamar. What's the surah after this one? Surah Al-Waqi'ah. So 54 is Qamar, the moon, and Surah Al-Waqi'ah, 56, the incident, is after. Okay, so this is the surah in between both of those surahs. That's important to mention because there's a group of scholars in our history that paid attention to how the Quran is organized, how it's laid out, how one surah comes after another, after another, after another. And they write about how sometimes Allah organizes His lessons, His teachings, in a certain way. So knowing where a surah is important because it helps us understand the organization of lessons. So I'll just share a couple of things about that with you guys. Some things that connect Surah Al-Rahman, the 55th surah, to the 54th surah. And some things that connect Surah Al-Rahman to Surah Al-Waqi'ah, the next surah. So it's part of a continuous conversation. So we understand it to be part of a continuous conversation. Even though they weren't revealed in this order. That's not necessarily the case. But at the end of the day, the Messenger ﷺ instructed that the surahs be put in this order. So, in Surah Al-Qamar, Allah Azza wa Jalla begins the surah by mentioning something really beautiful. He says, وَانْشَقَّ الْقَمَرِ. In the first ayah, one of the utterances of the first ayah is وَانْشَقَّ الْقَمَرِ. The moon split. You guys know the story? Very famous incident. Very famous story in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. He pointed at the moon, and by Allah's permission, the moon was split in half. And this was such a big deal that Allah even put it in the Quran. A surah dedicated and opening with that incident. So it's not a small matter as far as Allah is concerned, as far as Quran is concerned. I would say that that's a miracle of the Prophet. A miracle given to the Prophet. Isn't that true? So the surah begins by mentioning a miracle given to the Prophet. Surah Al-Rahman, the surah we're studying today, also begins with a miracle given to the Prophet. What's that? Ar-Rahmanu Allama al-Quran. So one thing already both surahs have in common is they both begin with the mention of a miracle. And it's almost as though one's a smaller miracle compared to the other. You know how you have the preview and then you have the main event? It's kind of like that. First, the moon splitting is a big deal, but not really that big compared to the revelation of the Quran. That's the real miracle. Okay? So it's like you're being prepared for the larger discussion. And that occurs in Surah Al-Rahman. There are lots and lots of subtle connections between Surah Al-Qamar and Surah Al-Rahman. In passing, I'll just mention one more. Just one more. At the end of Surah Al-Qamar, you'll find something mentioned about seating. Where you get to sit in paradise. Okay? Where you get to sit. When Surah Al-Rahman concludes, you will also find something about seating. Where you get to sit. Something about your position. You know, when there's a large crowd, seating becomes very important. When there's a large crowd, first row, second row, third row, I got front row seats, I got box seats, right? Seating becomes very important. Well, if we're at this important event, the first function in Jannah, we'd like to have good seating, right? So seating is mentioned, and that's a big deal. Okay, so that's just in passing. What's the surah after Ar-Rahman that I said it was? Al-Waqi'ah. In order to appreciate the connections between Surah Al-Rahman and Surah Al-Waqi'ah, I'll just give you a really quick breakdown of Surah Al-Rahman itself. And I'll ask you guys to remember this. This is important, okay? Surah Al-Rahman is broken up into 5 parts. Surah Al-Rahman, Surah number 55, broken up into 5 parts. Part 1 talks about the greatness of the Quran. That's basically the first major conversation in Surah Al-Rahman. That's part 1. Part 2 is Allah's favors to human beings. A bunch of things Allah has done for us that are all around us that we fail to appreciate. That we just take them for granted. And Allah makes a small list of those things that we just see around us and don't really care to pay attention to. That's part 2. What was part 1, just to see if you're still alive? Greatness of the Quran. Part 2? Huh? List of Allah's blessings. Part 3. What happens to the ungrateful? You have all these blessings, you didn't appreciate them, where should you end up? Well, Judgment Day and then Hellfire. The next discussion is Judgment Day and what happens to criminals on Judgment Day, and eventually what happens to them in Hellfire. So it's basically a discussion about the ungrateful. And it makes sense. First Allah mentions the Quran. If there's one thing you should be grateful for is Allah's book. And before even the Quran was revealed, you should have been grateful to Allah's favors that were all around you always, even before the Quran was revealed. You fail to be grateful to any of this, well, you know what? Here's where you end up. And the description of Hellfire and Judgment Day in this surah is particularly scary. It's particularly shocking, what Allah says about the Day of Judgment and also about Hellfire. He speaks briefly about Hellfire, but whatever little he says is pretty painful. When we get there, I'll share with you a personal story too. I was in Boston not too long ago, and at an MSA program, I don't do those much. This must have been a year or 2 years ago. And this sister, very perplexed sister, came up to me and said, you know, I left Islam 2 months ago. And I was really disturbed when I heard that. And I said, what was it? What was the problem? And she goes, I don't know why we claim that God is so merciful, and He talks about hell so mercilessly. He talks about hell in such graphic terms. What kind of God is so... He begins the surah by saying He's the most merciful, and then He talks about people burning and, being grabbed by the head and all this kind of stuff. I can't stand it. Right? I'll finish that. What I said to her in the conversation is interesting. Inshallah, when we get there, I'll share more with you about that conversation. Okay? Anyhow, so that's the third conversation. What was the first conversation? Let's see if you're still alive. Greatest of Quran. Second, list of Allah's favorites. Third, judgment day and hellfire for the ungrateful. Now that's pretty scary, right? When it's scary, the next discussion opens up when Ibn Khafa and whoever got scared, of standing in front of his master, Jannatan, he gets 2 gardens. So now there's a discussion about Jannahs. 2 Jannahs. That's discussion number 4 is two real estate properties in paradise. Okay, 2 gardens in paradise. And there's this beautiful description. We get like a tour, a virtual tour of Jannah in these few ayat. What does Jannah look like? Here's some glimpse for you. Here's a little bit of a tour. And you're enjoying this tour, and then comes discussion number 5. Towards the end of discussion number 4, Allah says, oh, you think that's a tour? Let me tell you. There's another 2. I've got another 2 Jannahs. This is just the, level 1. Then I've got the elite package, the premium package. Okay? The platinum member, etc. So the higher level Jannah is mentioned towards the end of the surah. So it opens up with a climax, the greatest miracle, Quran, and it ends with a climax, the greatest Jannah. So it goes from 2 Jannahs to even more awesome Jannahs. Okay, that's discussion number 5. So twice do we have parts 4 and part 5 both deal with what then? Paradise, but 2 different levels of paradise. Okay, we'll compare the 2 when we get there eventually. Okay, 5 subjects in Surah Rahmah. Can somebody walk me through them? Just call them out. Greatest of the Quran, number 1.
List of favors of Allah.
List of Allah's favors.
What happens?
The ungrateful. What happens to them? So that's the ungrateful, hellfire, same thing. That's number 4. 2 Jannahs. Number 5. 2 more Jannahs. Elite Jannah. Okay. What's the next surah? Surah Al-Waqi'ah. At the end, towards the end rather, of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, we find a passage dedicated to the greatness of the Quran. That's in the beginning of Surah Al-Rahman, and where is it? Towards the end of Surah Al-Waqi'ah. Towards the end of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, Allah says, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. This is actually very unprecedented in the Quran. Allah swears by things in the Quran all the time. Can you give me an example of Allah swearing by something in the Quran? He swears by time, the fig, the olive, the sun, the moon. He swears by different things. وَالشَّمْسِ وَالْقَمَرِ وَاللَّيْلِ وَالصُّبْحِ وَالْفَجْرِ وَالتِّينِ وَالزَّيْتُونِ وَالْعَصْرِ. Here, and أُقْسِمُ فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِيَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالنَّفْسِ اللَّوَّامَةِ فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِهَذَا الْبَلَدِ. There's so many oaths in the Quran. This one oath is unlike all of the others. It's like all of the others are in one category, and this one's in a category by itself. Why? Because never else in the Quran, nowhere else, does Allah take an oath, and before He goes on, He says, if you had any idea, this oath is amazing. He never does that. He never goes on to say, this oath that I just took right now is incredible, before we move on to the subject. He never does that. Here He says, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ. I swear to the placement of the stars. وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. And no doubt about it, it is apt, I swear to it, it is an oath that if you had any idea at all, it is huge, it's amazing. He goes on to describe how great the oath itself is. I know this is not the subject of our discussion today, but I do want to mention this because it's important and it's valuable. When you and I, and that will be a long conversation, so I'm giving you the summarized version. When somebody swears, I swear, man. Your mom says, qasam se. Okay? When somebody swears, is that the point, or the point is about to come? Somebody says, I swear, bro, and they just walk away. You guys, what do you swear, dude? I swear you better stop it. Somebody might get hurt. I swear, I will never eat chicken from this restaurant again. I swear. Something. You gotta add something. You can't just leave it at I swear. I swear is just there to get your attention. You're not just going to say, I'm not going to eat chicken here again. I'm going to emphasize it. I shall take an oath upon myself. Then I will declare it. Right? So when Allah says, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ, I swear by the placement of the stars, that's not the point. The point is what's going to be said after that. The point is what's coming. You're getting ready for the point. Now this is the thing I want you to pay attention to. Most of the time, the speaker wants you to understand how important the point is. This speaker, Allah Azza wa Jal, is making you appreciate how important even the prelude to the point is. Now, can you imagine how important the point is? Like the oath itself isn't the point, but even that's so important. Can you imagine the subject itself? This is unprecedented in the Quran. And at the end of it, he says, إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ. It is no doubt about it, I swear to it, a noble, a majestic Quran. He calls it a noble Quran. That's the point. But you know, and before we go off that tangent, what's the relationship between the placement of the stars and the Quran? Because usually when Allah swears by something, it is related to the point. It's related to the point. The Arabs used to travel a lot. A good chunk of the Arab society was Bedouin in nature. So they traveled a lot. And you know the kind of road trip they would engage in, what kind of terrain they had to go through, right? Do you think it's easier to travel in the desert by day or by night? Day or by night in the desert? Let me give you a hint. In the hot, steaming, killer desert, day or night? Night. Night. But there's a problem at night. You don't know where you're going. So you need some kind of navigation system. What's the navigation of the desert? That is the same as, the desert is the ocean of the land. The ocean of the, there's the ocean, water, and the ocean of the land is the desert. And both of them, when you want to navigate them, what do you need? The stars. So imagine this scene. There's no highway lights, gas stations, nothing. There's pitch black. The only light you have is what? Moon and the stars. And you've learned to navigate your way through the stars. The stars are your only source of light, and everything else around you is what? Darkness. The ayat of the Quran are your only source of light, and everything around you is what? Darkness. We're in a journey, just like the Bedouin Arab was in a journey. And in a journey, you need guidance. The stars have a placement. They're perfectly placed. And they're perfect for guiding you, because they're not going to move from their place. You'll always be, you can rely on them. Everything will change. You can rely on the stars. You can rely and find your way. And the same way the believer, once he comes to appreciate the Quran, can rely on Allah's book. SubhanAllah. That's one of the things that's talked about in the benefits of the placement of the stars, and then Allah mentioning the Quran. The other thing is, for the Arabs, very few things were beautiful. That's kind of because you don't have much to look around, You come out of your hut, your tent, and what do you see? What amazing scenery do you see? Well, nothing. But at nighttime you see something beautiful. Your eyes just can't get off of it. What is that? The stars. The stars were something high, something beautiful, something decorated. Allah alludes to the beauty of the Quran. How beautiful the Quran is. How high above, how majestic it is. How beyond human reach it is. It's not the product of a human being. Just like the stars are not the product of a human being. All of that's alluded to. Anyway, the passage is about the greatness of the Quran. Where is that in Surah Al-Waqi'ah? Where is that in Surah Al-Waqi'ah? Who remembers?
The end.
At the end. Where was that in Surah Al-Rahman? Towards the beginning. Okay, I'm going backwards in Surah Al-Waqi'ah. The second last subject in Surah Al-Waqi'ah. Allah mentions a list of His favors. He mentioned some of the things that He created that we fail to appreciate. Where was that in Surah Al-Rahman? Second subject. I'm going backwards again. The third last subject Allah mentions in Surah Al-Waqi'ah is people of hellfire. What was the third subject in Surah Al-Rahman? People of hellfire. The fourth last subject in Surah Al-Rahman, Allah calls them Ashabul Yameen, people of the right hand. People of the right hand. Where do people of the right hand go? Jannah. Coming towards the beginning of Surah Al-Waqi'ah, you read about As-Sabiqun, As-Sabiqun, the first and the foremost. Where do the first and the foremost, the elite of the Muslims go? The elite paradise. That's awesome. How Allah takes 5 lessons and then reteaches them in reverse order. You ever heard of the term teaching methodology? A teacher comes into class and says, today in these 40 minutes I got to teach you 5 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Before the period's over, he says, okay, we got to do review. Let's do review with what's freshest in your mind. Let's go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Teaching methodology in the Quran. It's a strategy on how to make the lessons of His book memorable to those who follow along. Okay? So that's not my introduction to the surah, that's just my introduction to where the surah is. Just where it is. Some things about where it is. Let's talk about the surah itself now. I told you how many subjects are in it? 5. But that's not enough to get introduced. To really get introduced to this surah, we have to have an interesting conversation that seems like it doesn't directly have to do with the subject, but it does. And that conversation, for the 3 of you that are taking notes, is the effective ingredient, or main ingredients of effective communication. That's what I want to say. The main ingredients of effective communication. What are the 3 main things? There are others, but I want to focus on 3. 3 main things that you need if you want to communicate effectively. Number 1, you have to be clear and meaningful in what you're going to say. Your content should be purposeful. You have a reason for opening your mouth. You have something meaningful to say. I'm sure a lot of you have friends that talk a lot, but they don't say anything. So they can speak to you for 30 minutes and at the end of it you're like, so what is it that you're saying? Right? There's a lot of content, but there's no clarity. Clear content is the first condition of effective communication. Clear content. You know, politicians are very good at using clear communication when they want to and being unclear when they want to. So if they're on trial for some kind of financial irregularity before a Senate hearing or something, and they're asked a yes or no question, did you or did you not sign off on this transaction? They'll give you a 45-minute answer. They'll tell you about their childhood and the name of their pet dog or everything else. But what you will not be able to get from those 45 minutes is not a yes and not a no. That is effective or ineffective communication?
Ineffective.
That's ineffective, but it's on purpose. People who want to hide the truth use what? Ineffective communication as a tool. People that want to project the truth, speak the truth, use what? Effective communication. They're direct, they're clear. You know, when the philosophers, Greek philosophers, came into contact with Islam, you know one of their earliest criticisms of Islam? It's too direct. It's too clear. We like to go around in circles. I don't know what this is straightforward. You know, it's too clear communication. That was their criticism. You know, there are no confusions. You know, it's no fun. So, the first thing is clear content. Clear content. The second tool of effective communication is style. I'll just call it style. A lot of times we have good things to say. Hello, I'm in a class, I can't talk right now. Style means you have something good to say, but you just don't know how to say it in a good way. You don't have the right style. We listen to khutbah every week. You go to the masjid, listen to khutbah every week. Every khutbah has Quran in it, has hadith in it, has Quran and sunnah in it. So there's nothing wrong with the content. For the most part, there's nothing wrong with the content in our speakers. Where is there a problem that puts you to sleep within the first 3 minutes of the khutbah? Silent. You sit down after a long commute from work, sit down in the masjid, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Akhir as-salat. You know, some of the best sleep you get that week is in Salat al-Jumu'ah. And a lot of it has to do with how a speaker carries himself. It may be a very powerful ayah. There's no doubt about the ayat being powerful. There's no doubt about the ahadith being powerful. They're just being presented in a really not powerful way sometimes. So it takes away from communication. It takes away from communication. I often give the example of children at Sunday school that bear the brunt of that problem. Right? They're sitting in a Sunday school class with a teacher who's apparently very bored with life himself or herself. And they want to make sure that these children also face some of that boredom. So they, you know, the Prophet ﷺ was born in the city of Makkah, and then these kids are sitting there like, oh, please. Then the Battle of Badr happened, and 313 Muslims went into battle. Are you kidding me? Seriously, that's how you talk about the Battle of Badr? You know? So, effective communication means you have to, you know, use the right kind of style to communicate. It's not just about public speaking and teaching Islam, by the way. I'm talking about all communication. So let me give you an example of different styles of communication. How many people here have children that are teenagers? Teenage kids. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. Okay, so teenage kids. They're upstairs, you're downstairs. Dinner is made. You make a call to your son or your daughter, dinner's ready. You know what they do? Of course this is what they do. They run down the stairs in a stampede and say, yes ma'am, and they sit down on the table and start eating right away. No, they don't. Dinner's ready. I said dinner's ready. Dinner's ready. Don't make me come up there. Then you update their Facebook status. Then you send them a text message. Leave them a voicemail. I'm going to tell you dinner. And then finally, that's effective communication. And then they yell down from upstairs, I'm coming, God! Oh, aren't you the first 8 times? And they still won't come. But a parent knows there's a certain kind of creature living in the household. You got to say something a lot of times before they get it in their head. Be back home by 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. I said 8 o'clock. 8 baje. الساعة الثامنة. أنا أوجه. 8 o'clock. Did you get me? 8 o'clock. What time are you going to come back? Oh, wait, no. 10 o'clock. We got it. You have to say it over and over and over and over again. You know when somebody's particularly stubborn and you have to break through that and repeat yourself a lot? And maybe you'll get through once. Now, it may be that at the same time you're calling your child to dinner, you're calling your father to dinner. He's sitting in the living room. You call him. Dad, dinner's ready. How many times do you say it? Once. I've been it's my time. And sits down. Right? Same message, same content, but different what? Different styles. And a lot of times we have really good things to say to our family members. You know, there's a young person in your family who's not taking his studies very seriously. There's the husband doesn't like the way the wife said something, it hurt his feelings. The wife doesn't like the way the husband carried himself, it hurt her feelings. She wants to communicate that to him. What she wants to say is meaningful and it's good, and what he wants to say is meaningful and good, but you know what? Most of the time they end up using the wrong what? Wrong style. You always do that. I hate it when you do that. Oh yeah? Well, you're no Sahabi yourself. It starts. There's a way to do things. And of course, you know, if you're from where I'm from in the world, Pakistan, then it's very difficult for you to say things nicely to your wife. We're genetically incapable. So, we don't have that gene. So if the wife cooks a really good meal, and you just, like it really hurts the ribs, and you say, this is good. It's really hard. So if it does come out of your mouth, this is pretty good.
you have to add something because you don't want it to get to her head, you know. So you say, it's very good, but I still hate your mother. Like, you just add something. You know, you just got to add something to the end of that line. It's just to balance the equation, you know, because we wouldn't want them to get arrogant or anything. Anyhow, the first ingredient was content, clear content. The second ingredient was what? Style. Here's the third ingredient. You have to know who you're talking to. You have to be aware of your audience. Every audience is different. Your teenage child is different from your 30-year-old. Your 4-year-old is different from your 35-year-old. You know, your husband is different from your uncle. You know, your brother is different from your nephew. Everybody's different. Everybody's different. And when you meet with different people and interact with different people, you have to take into consideration who is it that you're talking to, and your tone, the way you carry yourself, how you're going to organize your thoughts. All of that's going to change depending on who it is that you're dealing with. You may have the same exact message, but you have to change it according to the audience. It has to change according to the audience every time. Every time. You know, these are things that are just the basics of effective communication. And before we even get into the surah, let me tell you, we don't know these things. As Muslims, unfortunately, we don't use these things in our life much. So for example, sometimes our parents, and I'll pick on the kids later today, our parents, sometimes they communicate with their adult children the way they used to when they were 10. Like nothing's changed. And it doesn't work, and it makes situations worse for them and for their kids. It doesn't make things better, it makes things worse. Right? And this is just a part of not recognizing who your audience is. Now, the reason I brought all of this up is because every surah has at least one main audience. Every surah has at least one main audience. And of course, every surah has clear content. You already know that. But every surah also has its unique signature style. Every surah of the Quran has a certain style. That style is perfectly chosen to meet the needs of the, what? Audience. So if a surah has a style, and we're going to study a surah and we're going to appreciate something about its style, then you have to wonder, why was this style chosen? And the answer will lie in, well, who was the surah directed at? Who was Allah talking to? And why did He choose to talk in this way to them? Maybe this is the most effective way to communicate with that particular kind of audience. So understanding that really gives us a good insight into a surah. Before we can dive into a surah, it's really good to understand originally who was Allah talking to and why did He talk in this way. Now, let me tell you something about, just a brief synopsis of the struggle of the Prophet ﷺ. This man ﷺ starts delivering a message at the age of 40 to an audience in Mecca that was completely not ready for this message. For the most part, they were not ready for this message. They knew this man to be an honest, decent person in the community. They relied on him for major decision making. They looked towards him as an honest man. He had high reputation in the community. And the moment he starts talking this, what they considered crazy talk, all of that reputation, all of that goodwill, it just, overnight it disappears. All of it disappears overnight. Except in the minds and hearts of a few. Especially the elite of that society dismiss him right away. Even the ones that belong to his family. Actually, some of the worst people that were against the Prophet ﷺ were members of his own family. That should teach you something about da'wah to family. It ain't easy. Right? So it's not easy for the Prophet. It's not going to be easy for me and you. That's life. Anyhow. So the Prophet ﷺ, unlike us, we speakers, or people that do halaqat, khutbahs, things like that, we think sometimes we're da'is. And we're doing what the Prophet ﷺ did. Oh, not even close. What the Prophet ﷺ did was speak to an unwilling audience. What we do is speak to a willing audience. There's a big difference. You guys came here on your own will, made an effort to get here. The Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, Nuh ﷺ for 950 some years, is predominantly talking to an audience that doesn't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear it on day 1. You think they want to hear it more on day 2? You think they're a little more irritated by day 3? You think they really want to get away from you by day 4? Oh man. And is this a part-time thing for the Prophet ﷺ or full-time? So he's not just talking to them sometimes, he's talking to them. Somebody's talking to you all the time, and from the very beginning of that conversation, you didn't want to hear it. And they do it day after day after day after day after day, and you tell them, stop, leave me alone. And he tells you, I don't have a choice, God's telling me. I don't have a choice. I'm questionable. I have to answer to him. I'm telling you because I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. I don't see a God. What are you talking about? It's not up to me to show you. What is God telling you anyway? Well, he's revealing. How does he tell you? He lives there by an angel. What angel? Can you see the angel with these? There's no I can't show you. Can you see him? Yeah, well, he took over the entire horizon. وَلَقَدْ رَآهُ بِالْأُفُقِ الْمُبِينِ. He took over the entire horizon. What, this horizon? I don't see any angel. Leave me alone. And then they would come to the point and say, you're crazy, ma'adallah. But if you put it in that context, you can understand why they said that. They don't see what the Prophet sees. They don't see an angel coming and grabbing him and telling him to read. They just have to believe what comes out of his mouth. So they become more and more and more irritated. First they feel bad for him, he's lost his mind. Then they start getting agitated with him. So they start insulting him. Then they figure maybe he's a really intelligent guy. He's been smart 40 years of his life. We knew him to be the smartest guy among us, man among us. It can't be that he just went crazy. He must have an ulterior agenda. I think he's getting this stuff from somewhere else. He wants leadership and power or something. So they start trying to accuse his character. He's a liar. He's learning this stuff to get in our heads, using magic. He's learning it from the people of the book. Different allegations start getting thrown out. One after another. All for the purpose of getting one thing to stop. He should just stop talking to us. And then it gets really problematic when some young people, impressionable, dumb young people, according to them, start becoming Muslim. Some slaves becoming Muslim. People who didn't think have much intellect. You know, when Ali radiallahu anhu became Muslim, the whole crowd laughed. Look at this poor kid. He believes him. So cute. You know? That's what they thought. Childish. It's childish to believe, you know? So they diminished it. They reduced it to nothing. But the problem didn't go away. It kept exacerbating. And the Prophet ﷺ is not leaving them either. So finally, towards the end of the Meccan era, we find that they found one criticism. There's one, of all the criticisms you read in the Quran, one of the last ones was, okay, you've been talking about Judgment Day, sun and moon colliding into each other. You've been talking about the earth being stretched, people coming out of their graves. You've been talking about hellfire coming out, paradise, all of this stuff, angels descending from the sky. You know what? I will believe it when I see it. It's been 10 years already. Nothing's happened. You said, إِنَّهُمْ يَرَوْنَهُ بَعِيدًا وَنَرَاهُ قَرِيبًا. They see it very far, we see it here. It ain't here, it's been 10 years. You know what? Bring it. Bring it. يَسْتَعْجِلُونَكَ بِالْعَذَابِ. They rush you to bring the punishment. They rush you. Let's see it. We will now only believe when we what? See. Until you have something to show me. You yourself talk about Musa having a staff. They don't say alayhi salam, we do. You yourself talk about Isa having the shape of a bird and blowing into it by God's permission, and it flies off, turns into a real bird. Show us something. Show us something. And Allah Azza wa Jal refused. I mean, the splitting of the moon is a very small exception, and that's a long conversation in and of itself. But if you study Surah Al-An'am, the 6th surah of the Quran, the longest Meccan surah of the Quran, also a late Meccan surah, Allah basically said one thing, essentially, I'm not showing you anything, Quran's enough. And it was so tough, the stance of that surah. Of course, it's not Allah talking to them directly. Who's talking to them? The Prophet is. The words are of Allah, but the Prophet is the one actually doing the communicating. And the Prophet, he would even sometimes maybe get the idea, if Allah just showed them something, maybe they'd stop. So what does Allah do? He reveals an ayah in Surah Al-An'am. If you want to show them something, stick a ladder in the earth and climb up to the sky and go bring something down to show them, I'm not showing you anything. You know, فَتَأْتِهِمْ بِآيَةٍ. Bring them an ayah yourself. SubhanAllah. That's the stance Allah took. Quran is enough. One of the latest Meccan surahs is Surah Al-Ankabut. أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِهِمْ أَنَّا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابَ يُتْلَى عَلَيْهِمْ. Isn't it enough for them that we've sent the book being read to them? It's not enough for them? Just called it out just like that. You know? Now, I told you their final stance was, I will believe it when I what? See it. That's really important. Every time you would come up, no, you got something to show? No, I don't want to hear it. Go away. I don't want to hear it. You got nothing to show. You got nothing to show. You got nothing to show. They became stubborn on that. When somebody becomes stubborn and you want to get through to them, if you want to get through to them, you have to repeat yourself. When someone gets really stubborn and you want to communicate with them, it is important that you repeat yourself. Does this surah repeat itself? What does it keep repeating? فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. A few ayat, then they're slapped again. A few ayat, then they're slapped again. A few ayat, then they're slapped again. And the question, the way Allah Azza wa Jalla structures the ayat, when we get to the ayat, Allah has diagnosed the heart of the problem. The problem you not believing is not because you can't see anything. That's not the problem. The problem is something else. And when we get to those ayat, I'll show you what the problem is. Because this is still the introduction. And now we're reaching the last part of our introduction, probably the most important part of our introduction. I, by profession, am a teacher. And alhamdulillah, I feel very blessed by Allah Azza wa Jalla that I have the opportunity to take some 60 students, really wonderful people from all over the country for a period of about 10 months and teach them full time. And teaching somebody full time is very different from doing a seminar. Here I'm talking to you guys, I'm not teaching. Talking's easy. Teaching, ask the teachers of the Islamic school here, is hard. Teaching is difficult. Teaching means you have to say something, then you make sure the student understands it, then you test them, you give them homework, they make mistakes, you correct their mistakes, they make the same mistake again, and you just take a deep breath. No, let's try it again, and they do it again, and they make the same mistake, and you correct them again, and make the same mistake, and you keep being patient until you quit your job. Okay? That's teaching. And in teaching, sometimes your patience is really tested. Sometimes I'll spend like 3 hours at night preparing, how am I going to teach this one lesson of grammar? I got it, I think I got it, this one's going to click. And I come out in class swinging, and I teach this lesson, and I feel like, oh my God, if there was an Academy Award for teaching a grammar lesson, I think I earned it today. And a student raises his hand after 1 hour of me exhausting myself and goes, Ustad, could you repeat that please? And I say, what part? Everything? And I'll just look at him for a little while, maybe give him the look of death a little bit. But then after that, okay, you know what? Yes, I'll repeat myself. And I start over. Everybody else in the class is like, oh my God, I already did this. But no, let's make sure everybody understands. So I repeat myself, exhaust myself another hour. At the end of which the same student raises his hand and says, I don't know, it's not doing anything for me. Can you teach me another way? Okay, let's teach you another way. And I'll exhaust another hour finding another way to get the point across, and at the end of it he goes, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Maybe you're not a good teacher. Okay, talk to me during the break. Go into my office, explain it to him. No, it's not. It's just, I don't know. It's not working. Okay, come over for dinner. I'll explain to you over dinner. I explain over dinner. I don't know, son. The dinner's good, but the lesson? Okay, you know what? Why don't you move into my house? I'll teach you until you get this lesson. Okay? Does a teacher normally do that? I don't do that. Well, a teacher wouldn't normally do that. A teacher repeats himself, second time, third time, he goes, see me later. I don't know, inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. You know? And a teacher has a right to get angry after he's exhausted himself and ask you along the way, do you get it? Got it, no I didn't. You can't do that. That's messed up. It really boils the blood of an instructor. That's why, you know, they go postal sometimes in classrooms. Right? Now, in the case of the, by the way, you could blame the curriculum. You could also blame the teacher. And rarely in America, you might also blame the student. Right? Rarely. Usually it's the teacher's fault, the school's fault, or the curriculum's fault. It can't be the student's fault. My child? No, not my child. Back home in the Muslim world, it's always whose fault? The student's fault. The teacher could be sleeping in classes and read the chapter. And if the student fails, it's the student's fault. You didn't study. But we're in a different society. Now let's backtrack a little. There's a reason I brought this up. Allah Azza wa Jalla in this surah says He taught the Quran. So He took the role of a what? Teacher. So He's the teacher, who's the student? When the surah is coming down, who's the primary student? No, well, the Prophet ﷺ is the teacher's assistant. He's the one conducting the lesson. The curriculum and the teaching strategy and when should you teach which lesson in what period, all of that comes from Allah. Who will do the actual instructing? It is the Prophet ﷺ. Who are the students? The Quraysh. The Quraysh are willing students or unwilling students? Have you ever had a class of unwilling students? Is it difficult to have a class with unwilling students? Does it test the patience of the instructor? Oh yeah. And unwilling students can be disrespectful to the teacher. They can be impatient with the teacher. They can be obnoxious to the teacher. They can not listen. They can refuse to listen. All kinds of problems. It's not just that it's not like they're not smart, but they're just an evil kind of smart. So it tests the teacher's patience. And you know what? If a student is really misbehaving, what does the teacher do? Tell me. If a student is really misbehaving, really out of line, what does the teacher do? Show of hands, yes. Young man, you raise your hand, didn't you? How? What's the worst punishment in school? No recess. No recess is the worst punishment? The worst punishment is no Jannah, huh? Worst punishment of all time. You are going to the principal's office. You know, وَلِمَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ مُدِيرِهِ. Whoever feared standing in front of this principal. You're going to go back to the principal. The messenger gets mad at the student. Who can he complain to? So now the student is not in trouble with the messenger, the student is in trouble with Allah. Is that major trouble? Yes. But Allah keeps telling this teacher, be patient, be patient. I know they're being obnoxious, I know they're hurting your feelings, just keep teaching, just keep teaching, just keep teaching. And every time they offend the Quran, there are two parties that are offended. It's the Prophet ﷺ is offended, and more than that, who's offended? They're not making fun of you. No, they're not lying against you. بِآيَاتِنَا يَكْذِبُونَ. They're denying my ayat. They're offending me. So the ultimate teacher is really getting offended year after year after year. And as a teacher gets offended, the teacher historically in our experience of teaching, as a teacher gets offended, he has the right to punish. He has the right to punish. But this teacher, 10 years or more have gone by, this is a late Makki surah, and now they're saying we don't like these lessons. The only lesson that will teach us is when we what? When we see. Allah says, you know what? Any other teacher would have lost his patience by now. But I am unimaginably merciful as a teacher. Ar-Rahmanu 'allama al-Qur'an. The unimaginably merciful, the extremely merciful, chooses to do what? To teach the Quran, to taught the Quran, instead of executing punishment on you, instead of just punishing you. The last comment in my introduction. And now you appreciate the benefit of the word Ar-Rahman there. What Ar-Rahman is doing in the beginning of the surah. Why not Allah? Why not any other word? Because this teaching is unusual. It's an unusual mercy from Allah Azza wa Jalla. Is there anything wrong with the curriculum? Is there anything wrong with the teacher? The best of all curricula ever. The best teacher in humanity ever. And you say it's not enough for you? And that for 10 years. And that's after you've insulted him and exhausted him and, you know, after all, and you say it's not enough for you? You're not impressed? And it's not like, for us, we can say maybe there's something wrong. Allah already knows who's got the problem. He already knows who's got the problem. And He still chooses to show mercy and teach the Quran, not wipe the Quraysh off the face of the earth. He doesn't do that. So this is the last comment. The human being, when the human being says, I will only believe what I what? See, is actually acting like an animal. I'll tell you why. If there was an announcement, brothers and sisters, there is free food from the chicken guy stand outside available right now. Please go in a single line. It's not available, relax. Okay, but if it was, you'd hear that message and say, okay, well, you know what? Eat the water. I'm gonna, of course, not go in a single line because you're Muslim. That's not possible for us. Hajj is a good example of that, but the passport lines at Hajj. But we would hear language and we'd respond. You're on a highway. I'll give you an easier example. You're on a highway and you're listening to the traffic news report. And the traffic news report says the 295 is booked from 3 exits down from where you are. So if you're on it, take an exit. You listen to that news and you say what? These kuffar news, I don't know, I can't rely on them. I'm going to go straight. No. To you, this came from a reliable source, so what do? Did you see the traffic before you took the exit? No. Language, if it came from a reliable source, was enough. If you heard the fire alarm, which is a kind of language, you would exit a building. Would a cat or a dog or a mouse or a cockroach or a bird exit the building? No, not from a fire alarm. What would they exit a building from? When they smelled the fire, felt the heat of the fire, saw the flame, then the animal would run the other way. An animal is only convinced by the 5 senses. Most importantly, sight. An animal only responds and reacts to what it sees. A human being, in religion and outside of religion, has the opportunity to react not just based on what he or she sees, but what he or she hears. You guys, some of you have gone into business practices. Some of you opened up a store. Some of you chose the major this year, your own major this year. You talked to other people that have gone into that major. You didn't see anything. You just took reliable information from others. Language was enough for you to make even serious life decisions. You talked to people, is this a good neighborhood to move to? Is this a nice area to live in? Is this a good school to put my children in? You looked at other people's consultation, language, it was reliable to you, and you said, okay, you know what, Bismillah, I'm ready to make my decision. A lot of our decisions, they come from reliability on others. We just take reliable sources, like the news, and we make our decisions. That's the advantage of being human. We have the advantage of language. The birds don't have a news report. They don't have books. They don't have reliable knowledge. They just have to see to respond. That's what they have to do. So when these people say the Quran, which is language, isn't it? The Quran is language. Language is not enough for us. We will only believe when we see. That's like saying the great gift of God to humanity, the gift of language, we're not ready to appreciate that. We're only going to be convinced when we are convinced the way animals are convinced. We're not ready to respect our own humanity. And that is why you also appreciate in the surah, Allah says He's extremely merciful that He's teaching the Quran. After all, the Quran is being revealed to who? Khalaqa al-insan, not anybody else, you're insan. And what makes you insan is in the next ayah. Allamahu, and He taught him speech. You know speech, buddy. So I'm going to convince you by means of speech. You're an evolved creature. You're mature enough to understand by means of speech. So that's our introduction to this really beautiful surah. It's talking to the extremely stubborn, and it's trying to show them that the Quran in and of itself is enough. Language is enough for you to be convinced. I haven't explained these ayat yet, just introduced them inshallah ta'ala. So we're reaching our first break now, alhamdulillah. I don't see a clock. I do see a clock here. Okay, so it's 11 o'clock now, so it's been exactly 50 minutes. At this point, I'll give you guys a first break, and sisters will have the questions. I'll keep the questions on the mic so you can hear, but if you guys have a break, you can do whatever you want to do in the break. 10 minutes exactly from now, I'm going to come back up here and start talking, even if you guys are in a situation of chaos. I don't care. I have 6 children. I can talk through anything. Okay. Barakallahu wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum. questions? Yes.
Can you find out what time he's going to do?
I will be sending